Hello, welcome to Movie Humpers. My name is Bob Sham.
My name is Angela.
And this is our final selection for the month of July's theme of glory and propaganda, in which we talk about movies at war. Today we're discussing our one and only Civil War film. At first I wasn't going to put a Civil War film in here. I almost put in Shenandoah, your mother's favorite movie. We watched that with your family a couple years ago.
Yep.
Movie's alright, not bad.
Jimmy Stewart.
Jimmy Stewart's in it. We're going golden age today, back to the pre-talkies. And this is going to be our second oldest ever movie we're going to discuss. It's only 2 years away from being 100 years old, this movie. The oldest movie that we've ever discussed no movie will ever be older than that. We discussed The Story of the Kelly Gang, a 1906 Australian film that is widely considered the first full-length feature film. There's parts missing in it. It was our very first episode we ever recorded for this. One of our most least viewed selections. And the reason why we say death to all traitors sometimes, which no one will know why, because as I said, our first episode, one of the least viewed. But this one today is from 1926. But before we get into it, are you going to miss war movies?
No.
Okay. Well, next month is probably not going to be much more peaceful as we get into a theme I'm calling Some Bullshit Tomorrow, which is movies in the future, dystopian movies, or movies about the future. Some will be kind of sad, and I think some will just be in the future. We do change scores after the fact, and I find when I edit as well, and I'm going through scenes and trying to pick things for editing the show together, sometimes that will change my mind about certain things, right?
That makes sense. Sometimes us talking about it changes our mind.
So I know Waltz with Bashir, I think I went up about a half a point on that one.
That's fair.
Because looking back, there's like a cinematography to that movie that I do really like. But for the first time ever, I removed a movie that barely made it into S tier, and I put it down to a 9, which is a fantastic score. But Paths of Glory,
yeah,
I brought to a 9. And I think the thing that it barely made S tier at the time when we discussed it, but I think what brings it down to a 9 is all these bros being Frenchmen. It's just too funny for me. I mean, everything else about the movie is just about perfect, but there was just something about the nature of that seemed a little funny to me, even though the movie is still great. And if we give your movie a 9, that's a fantastic fucking score.
I gave it a 4.5, so
yeah,
I thought it was a high A.
I think it only reduced it by a 0.25, so it's still a fantastic movie. You could still say that a 9 is as good as anything that would score a little bit above it, easy. But today's movie, our final glory and propaganda selection, our only Civil War movie this month, is The General from 1926, directed by Buster Keaton and Clyde Bruckman, written by Al Boasberg, Clyde Bruckman, Buster Keaton, and Charles Smith, and starring Buster Keaton, Marion Mack, among others, based upon a memoir called The Great Locomotive Chase, which was written by a Union soldier in 1863. So apparently there is some truth to a Union regiment chasing a Confederate steam engine. Apparently there's some truth to that. This movie cost $750,000, which is a lot of fucking money in like 1925, 1926, and it made $1 million. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, for its time, by many considered Buster Keaton's best movie.
I was impressed with not only the story, but the physicality. Obviously, everything is practical. The scale of this is impressive. They are blowing up bridges and locomotives are falling into rivers.
This is a pure comedy. when people say they don't do things like this anymore, a lot of times it's bullshit or said by someone who's never actually going to dive into the history of anything in the first place. They're just having some emotional response. But here, in the nature of comedy of this time, the silent film era comedy and how things were done, they really don't make this. I mean, every once in a while you'll get some actor that pops up like a Jackie Chan or who will be like, yeah, this guy does his own stunts and it's a big deal. Tom Cruise will do his own, I don't know, skydiving or whatever the fuck, freak out his insurance company.
There's no doubt here, though, that Buster Keaton is doing all of these things because you can so very clearly see him.
Yeah, they don't have that. They're not going to have the level of technology where they can fake that. They would have to pull back so far. And who is the stuntman at this time that would do all of this stuff? And when we were talking about Jerry Lewis movies last April, we were commenting on how absolutely physically fit Jerry was and his physicality and what he did, and how, especially in The Ladies' Man on that set, when he's constantly going up and down and holding himself on door frames and shit. Like, if you were a physical comedic actor in a silent movie in the 20s, you're one of the strongest, most fit people out there. I saw something where, and should be no surprise to anyone, where these weightlifters were very impressed with this guy who rock climbs. And the rock climber was pound for pound a little bit stronger than these guys that are benching huge. And of course, this guy is like nimble as shit, holding his whole body weight, constantly on the sides of things and having that strength to not only hold himself up, but to do it for hours at a time.
I don't know this guy in particular, but I'm sure he didn't look as strong as these muscle men who have these big muscles, but
was wiry.
He's practically
he had muscle,
strong.
But he was wiry.
He probably could do a wider variety of things than them as well, but his legs are a lot stronger. You know, it depends on what it is you're trying to do. If you're trying to get a look and you're trying to do a physical thing, you're going to, train in a different way.
Buster Keaton, this guy has that type of frame, that kind of body, that kind of physicality. And to see, it's going to be a challenge to talk about this in detail. I mean, this movie's almost 100 years old, so you can actually find it pretty easy online if you just go look. It's different versions of it on YouTube. There's a colorized version on Prime you could watch. Like, any place that shows movies seems to have a version of this. This is a pure comedy, and I think, the laughs are often on the Buster Keaton character of Johnny Gray. Golden Age Hollywood, notoriously soft on the Confederacy and Confederate ideals. And when we get into, the Civil War as represented in the, his films more closer to the mid-20th century, it seems to strike this centrist tone. I guess not until you get into movies like Glory or something where it has more of a specific side to it. But even then, Hollywood's always trying to strike some tone of when they're talking about the Civil War.
In this movie, he tries to join, but they won't take him. But the only reason he even thinks to enlist is because the girl that he's in love with expects him to.
Annabelle.
He is a very successful train engineer.
Yeah.
He is good at his job.
He has a train that's called the General.
He's in love with his train. They say at the very beginning, the woman and the train are the two loves of his life. And while he doesn't want to stop being an engineer, he recognizes that she's going to think he's weak if he doesn't go. He doesn't get accepted, and he thinks it's because of his physical body. He's looking at these other men saying, oh, well, yeah, okay, I'm shorter. But then there's a short guy that comes through, and he's confused. Ultimately, the only reason he is involved in this whole conflict is because of his train, because they steal his train. But he's also lost the girl. And so there is this propaganda. He was still doing a good thing for his country by running this train. But the ultimate success at the end is putting on that uniform for real, right, and getting that girl because you're now brave enough.
Well, when the Civil War starts in this movie, some guy runs up and says, Fort Sumter has been fired upon. I mean, they don't say that the South fired upon Fort Sumter, But then the war breaks out, and yeah, Annabelle won't even look at Johnny until he's in a uniform. And they decide not to enlist him because he's an educated railroad engineer, and that's very important to have. But for some reason, they don't tell him that specifically. They're just like, nah. Annabelle's like, you ain't getting this Confederate puss unless you put on a Confederate uniform. You're not getting this until you fight for slavery, all right? So he's bummed out, and like a year passes, right? And Annabelle she gets on a train to go see about her father who's sick, who's a little up north, right?
Yeah, her brother has come home, and he has his arm in a sling. She is saying to her brother, I'll send word on how Dad's doing as soon as we get back. At the same time, there has been a plan to hijack this train. They try to wait until everyone gets off the train, but she's decided to get into the luggage area to get something out of her trunk while everyone else has gone to eat lunch. And that's the second they steal the train.
Yeah, Union soldiers, this takes place around Chattanooga. They come down to pretend that they're going to enlist for the Confederacy and then hijack this train and take it. And
the goal is to mess up the tracks and blow up the bridges on the way so no one can follow them.
So the entirety of the movie is this comical, physical romp where Buster Keaton has to go and chase and get this train back, and then has to be chased on his train by tons of Union soldiers who are comically just covering this train while there's certain bits of timing, infamous images from this movie. A lot of, when you hear people talk about Buster Keaton, you'll see a lot of stills from this particular movie. He's crawling all over this train, making sure the steam is rolling, having to, at times, deal with the tracks that they're breaking up and putting them back together as he's running out in front of a moving train, trying to get things back together and then hopping on and off. And this guy is in fantastic shape. There's a great part where he needs to remove a piece of wood on the track, and he's holding a piece of wood, and he just, in a manner of perfect timing, just takes the wood plank and throws it, and it hits the end of the other wood plank, and it flips it right off the track just in time.
Beautiful. It's a beautiful shot.
It's just not some shit you really see a lot anymore. Yeah, I mean, even today, actors are insured, right? How much would Buster Keaton's insurance rates be today? How did that even work back then?
There's also a knocked out Union soldier on his train that he's kind of stepping over. It comes back at some point. He's also trying to save his girl, who he doesn't even know is on that train for quite some time. Also, I thought it was weird that they were having to chop the wood on the engine. And one thing I never knew, which makes complete sense, but there's a lot of comedic timing around it as well, is how you have to stop every so often to refill the water in the engine to make that steam.
Yeah.
I actually learned a lot about trains from this movie.
I mean, this is a real train, right? And there's one point where he's hiding out in a Union encampment, or they're at a house where Union officers are, and they've abducted Annabelle, and that's how he has Annabelle along with him from this point. He hears about their plan, and he frees Annabelle and steals the train to head back so he can warn the Confederate soldiers back at the base.
There's a gorgeous shot. In that house, he has snuck in and tried to steal some food, and then had to hide under a dining table while the men are having their meeting, which is where he learns about their plan. And one of the soldiers has a cigar, and he burns a hole into the tablecloth. And you see, when Annabelle is brought into the room, you see her face in this little perfect silhouette through the tablecloth of him seeing her as though she's in a gorgeous portrait.
Yeah.
And that's when he, oh my God, I have to save my girl.
And he does so. And it's hard to point out what happens when, because it's just a romp from beginning to the end. It's just an impressive feat of comedic physical comedy that you just have to relax and take in. And a lot of it is genuinely funny and incredibly impressive. And there's even a point where we have a full battle, and it looks really good between Union and Confederacy. And he's knocking out Union soldiers that are managing to get on his train. And one is just gets knocked out, and he occasionally gets up to see what's going on, and he has to keep knocking him out again. So he's helping his girl. His girl is helping to get wood together. He's having to jump on and off this train. It often goes in reverse. I'm not sure how the functionality of that works, but so he has to go back and forth to keeping this train running, keeping the tracks clear, trying to obstruct the tracks for the Union trains that are chasing him, and they have to stop and pull things off and yank things off the track, and all at the same time he has to make sure this Union officer is knocked out on his train.
There's also a huge bit where she doesn't know how to drive the train, so she has to learn how to drive the train. The track is going in a U shape. He runs down a hill to meet her right when she figures out how to back up the train. So he runs back up the hill to jump on the train. He's not only running all over the train, he's running all over the world.
Yeah, the terrain.
Movie. These tiny little moments that are extra, but are what make it so endearing. At one point, he has her putting wood into the fire, and she grabs a twig and starts to throw the twig in, and he picks up the twig and he's like, and like throws it out. It's still wood. Like she could have just put it in there. But it basically was him telling her, you're being an idiot right now. But then he kisses her and they make up and it's fine.
There's one point where the armies are converging on this bridge area, this river area. And they're prevented, the Union's prevented from crossing. We have a battle going on in this river. And there's a point where Buster Keaton is trying to adjust this cannon or something. These Confederate soldiers are getting shot around him. It's like the funniest version of people dying in war that we've seen all month long. Soldiers get plugged, and it's done for like comedic effect.
Even the train falling off the bridge bit is hilarious because Buster Keaton has set a fire on the bridge with the oil from the lamp. One of the heads of the Union Army says, oh, it's not messed up enough. The train can go across. And they try, and they fucking fall. It's collapse. Just, they're dumb.
He does manage to get him and Annabelle back to the Confederate Army and to set up for the battle, and they run out and they have their big battle. And I guess the Union is forced to retreat, and so he comes back, and what do you know, the Union officer that's been knocked out on the train this whole time, he sees him there, and he gets up and he walks him and he surrenders him to the Confederate general. And the Confederate general makes him a lieutenant. He goes from not being recruitable at all to being a lieutenant. And I assume the Union general dies a slow, agonizing death in Andersonville. There's plenty more to it. There's plenty more comedic romp. This movie runs about an hour, 20 minutes. Highly recommended just for film history and to see how Buster Keaton, one of the more infamous silent film stars, probably second only to Charlie Chaplin, and just to see the physical comedy, the physicality of these old vaudeville style guys and what they brought to the table. There really is nothing like that even to this day. So for more madcap fun that we didn't even get to, just go online, search The General from 1926, Buster Keaton. You'll see plenty of versions of it. That said, we're going to give this our final Glory and Propaganda selection, 1 through 5 each, combined for best out of 10. What do you give it?
I think it's a solid 4.
I'm going to go a 4.25. So check it out at an 8.25. The General is right underneath a couple of animated classics, Mad God by Phil Tippett and Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs by David Hand. I think it has, it shares historical significance. That said, this is it for Glory and Propaganda. We're done. No more war movies. But I wouldn't say things get much more upbeat next month, especially later this week when we knock out a couple of more Lars von Trier movies, because we want to get to a dozen of these before the year is over. We go into the future for some bullshit tomorrow of a variety of degrees. So, but we'll still be talking about some good ass movies. So one last time, let's say it as we go.
Let's hear it for the boys.